Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 7. The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this wasn't not someone to cross. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fitted the whole of the Dursley's house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like that one at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase fencing them led to the upper floor. They followed Professor McGonagall across the fresh stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be there. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber of the hall. They crowded in, staring at rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of the term banquet will begin shortly. But before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted in your houses. The sorting hat is a very important ceremony because while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The four houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own novel history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphant will earn you house points, while any rule break will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be created to whatever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourself up as much as you can while you are waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Long's smug nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us into the house?" he asked to Lon. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurt a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test in front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked nervously and anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all spells she'd learned and wondering which one she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous, never. Not even when he'd had to take a school report home to the Dursley saying that he'd somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Any second now, Professor McGonagall will come back and lead him to his doom. Then something happened which made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back wall. Pearly white and slightly transformed, they glide across the room, talking to each other and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing, which looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." "My dear friar, haven't we give Pips all the chance he deserves? He gave us all the bad names, and you know, he's not really even a ghost, I say. What are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing rough and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. New students, said Fat Flyer, smiling around at all of them. About to be sorted, I suppose. A few people nodded moderately. I hope to see you in Huff Puff, said the friar. My old house, you know. A few people nodded moderately. Move along now, said a sharp voice. The sorting ceremony about to start. Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts flowed away through the opposite wall. Now, form a line, Professor McGonagall told the first years, and follow me. Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into the line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber back across the hall and through a pair of double doors and a great hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles which was floating in mid-air over 4 long tables. Where the rest of the students were sitting, those tables were lit with the glittering gold plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall had lit the first years up here so that they can come to a halt in a line facing the other students. With the teachers behind them, the hundreds of faces stared at them like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelights. Then here and there among the students, the ghosts shone mistily silver. Meaning to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upright and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read it in Hogwarts history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open onto the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a full-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched with friars and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they have to try to get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought widely. That seemed to be sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a second there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rib near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I will eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your brows black, your top hat silk and tow, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your hat the sorting hat can see. So try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor where they're dear and brave at heart. Their darling nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff where they are just as loyal. Those petulant Hufflepuff are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you're ready to mind, where they are weak to learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you will make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't feel afraid, don't get it a rip. You are safe in hands, though I have none, for I'm a talking hat." The whole hall burst in applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and then became quiet again. "So we've just got to try on the hat," Ron whispered to Harry. "I will kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll." Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot easier than having to do a spell. But he did wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward and holding a loan of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted, she said. Albertana, a pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails, stumbled out of the line, put on the hat which fell right down on her eyes, and sat down. A moment pause. Hufflepuff, cried the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving madly at her. Phone's Susan. Hufflepuff, shouted the hat again. The Susan scuttled up to the seat next to Hannah. Boot Harry. Ravenclaw. The table next second from the left clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Harry as he joined them. Buckhurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brother kept calling. Burstro Millicent then become a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination after all he heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked unpleasant a lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked up for teen during sports lesson at his old school. He had already always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because he wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch, Fletchery, Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed the hash out the house at once, but at other it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before he had decided him out Gryffindor. Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor, cried the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry. A horrible thought always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages? Until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he'd better get back on the train. When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When he finally shouted Gryffindor, Neville ran off still wearing it, and had to jog back amid gales of laugh to give it to McDougal Morag. Malfoy swagged forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when he screamed, Slytherin. Malfoy went to join his friends at Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon Knott, Parkinson, there were a pair of twin girls, Partil and Perch, Sally Ann's, and then, at last, Potter Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out, the little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter, she said. The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I said. Not a big mind either. There's talent. Oh my goodness, yes. And a little thirst to prove yourself. Now, that's interesting. So where should I put you? Harry gripped the edge of the stool and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, said a small voice. Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat shout the last word to a whole. He took off the hat and walked shakily towards the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin. He hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy the prefect got up and shook his hands vigorously, while the Weasley's twin yelled, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite the ghost in a rough he'd seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry sudden horrible feeling he just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the end of and nearest him sat Hagrid, who caught his eyes and gave him a thumbs up. Harry glanced back. And there, in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card he got out of the chocolate frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shines brightly as a ghost. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell too, the nervous young man from the leaky cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. And now there was only 3 people left to be sorted again. Turpin, Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green by now. Harry crossed his fingers under the table, and a second later the hat had shouted, "Gryffindor!" Harry clapped loudly, with the rest of Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. "Well done, Ron, excellent!" Percy Weasley pompously across Harry's, and Giovanni Barlesi was made a Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scrolls and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He had only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasty seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had got to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arm open wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, and here they are. Nitwit, Barber, Oddment, Twig. Thank you." He sat back down. Everyone clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. "Is he a bit mad?" he asked Percy uncertainly. "Mad?" said Percy angrily. "He's a genius, best wizard in the world. But he's a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry?" His mouth fell open. The dish in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes. Roast potatoes, chips, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrot gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, mint humbugs. The Dursleys had never actually starved Harry, but he'd never even allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with the bits of everything except the humbugs and began to eat. It was so delicious. "That does look good," said the ghost in the rough sadly, watching Harry cut up his steak. "Can't you?" "I haven't eaten for nearly 500 years," said the ghost. "I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas D. Mimsy, Porpington, at your service. Resistant ghost of Gryffindor Tower." "I know who you are," said Ron suddenly. "My brother told me about you. You're Nearly Hadley Sneak." "I would prefer you to call me Sir Nicholas D. Mimsy," said the ghost. Began to stiffly, but sandy-haired Sidman Finnegan interrupted. "Nearly Hadleys? How can you be Nearly Hadleys?" Sir Nicholas looked extremely ruffled, as if their little chat wasn't going at all the way he wanted. "Like this," he said irritably. He seized his left ears and pulled. His whole head swung off his neck and fell onto his shoulder. as if it was on the king. Someone had obviously tried to behead him, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned look on their face, nearly headless Nick flapped his head back onto his neck, coughed, and said, "So, new Gryffindors, I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year." Gryffindor had never gone so long without winning. Slytherin had got the cup 6 years in a row. The bloody barons becoming almost unbelievable. He is Slytherin's ghost. Harry looked over at the Slytherin's table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there. With blank staring eyes, a gaunt face, and a robe stained with silver blood, he was right next to Malfoy, who Harry was pleased to say didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. "How did he get covered in blood?" asked Seamus with great interest. "I've never asked," said nearly headless Nick. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the plates, leaving them sparkling clean as before. A moment later, the puddings appeared, blocks of ice cream in every flavor you could think of, apple pies, tropical tarts, chocolate eclair, and jam donuts, truffle, strawberry, jelly, rice pudding. As Harry helped himself to a tropical tart, he talked turn to their families. "I'm half and half," said Seamus. "My dad's a muggle, Ma'am didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married. But of all nasty shock for him." The others laughed. "What about you, Neville?" said Lon. "Well, my gran brought me up, and she was a witch," said Neville. "But my family thought I was a muggle for ages. My great uncle Archie kept trying to catch me off my guards and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of the Blockpole pier once and nearly drowned, but nothing happened until I was 8. Great Uncle Archie came round for tea, and he was hanging me out of an upstairs window by the ankle when my great auntie Anne offered him a meringue, and he accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all pleased. Gran was crying. She was so happy, and you have to see their faces when I got in here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come, you see. Great Uncle Archie was so pleased he brought me my toad." On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione went talking about lessons. "I do hope they start straight away. There's so much to learn. I'm practically interested in transfiguration. You know, turning something into something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You will be starting small, just matches into needles and that sort of thing." Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy, looked at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell in the Elfston Tavern was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and shallow skin. It happened very suddenly. The hooked-nosed teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hard pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. "Ouch!" Harry clasped on his head. "What is it?" asked Percy. "Nothing." The pain had gone as quickly as it had come. Harder to shake off the feeling Harry had got from the teacher's look, a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. "Who's the teacher talking to Professor Quirrell?" he asked Percy. "Oh, you know Quirrell already, do you? No wonder he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everyone knows he's after Quirrell's stuff. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape." Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, the The puddings disappeared, and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet again. The whole fell silence. Ahem, just a few more words. Now we're all fed and watered. I have a few start of term notice to give you. First year should note that the forest is the guard's own forbidden to a pupil. And a few of our older students will be well to remember that as well. Dumbledore's strictly eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. I have also been asked by Mr. Finch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trial will be held in the second week of term. Anyone interested in playing for their house term should contract Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but he was one of the few people who did. He's not serious, he muttered to Percy. Must be, said Percy, frowning at Dumbledore. It's odd, because he usually gives us a reason why we are not allowed. Go somewhere, the forest full of dangerous beasts, everyone knows that. I do think he might have told us, Prefect at least. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the other teacher's smile had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a little flick as if they were trying to get a fly off the end of the long golden ribbon flowing out of it, which rose high above the table and twitched itself snake-like into words. Everyone picked their favorite tune, said Dumbledore. Now let's off we go. And the school bellowed. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, foggy water Hogwarts, teach us something, please. Whether we be old and bold or young with scrubby knees, our head could do up with filling with some interesting stuff. For now they are bald and full of hair that flies and bits of fluff. So teach us something worth knowing, bringing back what we forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot. Everyone flashed the song at different times. At last, only the Weasley twin was left singing along to a very slow match. Dumbledore conducted their last few lines with his wand, and when they were finished, he was one of those who clapped loudest. Ah, music, he said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime, off you trot. The Gryffindor first years followed Percy through the chattering crowds, out of the great hall up to the marble staircase. Harry's legs were like legs again, but only because he was so tired and full of food. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed. Or the twice Percy led them through the doorway hidden behind the slide panel and hanging tapestry. They climbed more staircase, all yawned and dragged their feet, and Harry was just wondering how much farther they have to go when they came to a sudden halt. A bundle of walking sticks was floating in midair ahead of them. As Percy took a step towards them, they started throwing themselves at him. Peeves, Percy whispered to the first years, a poltergeist. He raised his voice. Peeves, show yourself. A loud, loose sound like the air let out by the balloon answered. Do you want me to get out, bloody balloon? There was a pop and a little man with wicked dark ears and a wide mouth appeared, floating cross-legged in the air, clutching the walls walking sticks. Ooh, he said, with an evil cackle. Icky first years, what fun! He swooped suddenly at them. They all ducked. Go away, Peeves, or the baron will hear about this. I mean it, barked Percy. Peeves stuck out his tongue and vanished, dropping the walking sticks on Neville's head. They heard them chewing away, rattling coats and armor as he passed. You want to be watching out for Peeves, said Percy as they sat up again. The bloody baron's the only one who can control him. He won't even listen to prefects. Here we are. At the very end of the corridor hung the portrait of the very flat woman in the pink silk dress. Password, she said. Capet Draconis, said Percy, as the portrait swung forward to reveal a round hole in the wall. They all scampered through it, never need a leg up, and found themselves in the Gryffindor common room, a cozy round room full of squishy armchairs. Percy directed the girls through the one door to their dormitory and the boys through another. At the top of the spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers. They found their bed at first, 5 four-posters hung with deep red velvet curtains. Their trunks had already been brought up. Too tired to walk much, they pulled up their pajamas and fell into bed. Great food, isn't it? Ron muttered to Harry through the hangings. Get up, Scabbers, he's chewing my sheets. Harry was going to ask Ron if he had any of the treacle tarts, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which was talking to him, telling that he must transfer to Slytherin at once because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be the Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but it tightened faithfully. And there was Malfoy laughing at him as he struggled with it. Then Malfoy turned into a hook-nosed teacher, Snape, whose laugh became higher and cold. There was a burst of green lights and Harry woke, sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell fast asleep again, and when he woke next day, he didn't remember the dream at all.